There were many nations that fought in the second of the two most large-scale wars in all of history. Many nations you will have heard about, like the French, who surrendered. The little island of Britain that stood alone against the oppressors even though they were actually an empire. The Soviets, who started on the same side as the Germans. The Polish, who were kind of left in the dust only to be occupied by another oppressive ideology. The Canadians, the Aussies, the Danish, who just hope you don't remember that they actually surrendered quicker than the French. The Indians, and many, many more. Today we're going to talk about the contribution of a nation that until recently I had absolutely no idea fought in World War II. I simply stumbled across a History Matters video, made a TikTok about it, and everyone went mental. You ask, and I shall deliver. So yes, without further ado, it's time to look at the history of the smoking snakes. Yes, you know the drill. I'm sponsoring me, I'm gonna fight Jake Paul, yada yada. Listen, guys, if you like, subscribe and share, I might be able to get some new jokes. Also hit that bell button so that you know when my new videos are coming up. If you want to support me elsewhere, you can support me on Patreon, where you can get access to videos 48 hours early, as well as sneak peeks, and you can even get some Discord privileges. If you like the look of my moustache and you're absolutely mortified that I can't come to your house and show you what this tash can really do, well, you can buy my merch. It's available on the US or UK versions of Spreadshirt, Spreadshop, one of those. It's a merch store. And all my tops have a moustache on it with my logo, so you can rub me all over it. No. Lastly, as I always say, I self-publish a book on Amazon and I want to write the sequel and I don't have the time to write the sequel, so if you buy my book, I'll have more time to write the sequel and then you can read the sequel and we can all have fun reading the sequel. Alright, now, shh. I see you checking your phone. Now listen, because Daddy's talking. I'm not going to lie, going into this, I'm going to apologise for every piece of Portuguese I get wrong, because it's probably going to happen a lot. Anyways, in the 1920s, Brazil finds itself in the midst of internal conflict. Radicals from both the left and the right fight for complete control of the country. This would lead to Getulio Vargas rising to power in the country, becoming the president of Brazil. Brazil would then begin social reforms and industrialisation. However, Vargas was a little bit authoritarian. During this time, Germany and Brazil would begin growing into a tighter bond, while simultaneously, Vargas would ensure that Brazil and the US had closer ties. You see, at the time, Brazil was worried that Argentina may lead their Spanish-speaking neighbours into isolating them. In 1935, the Germans begin pushing for a tighter relationship with Brazil, becoming their main trading partner. As this happens, the extremely anti-communist government slowly begins to mirror fascist Europe. Vargas dislikes this greatly as he wants a Brazil that is united as one people. He immediately bans Nazi insignia and forces schools to only teach Portuguese. Yet at the same time, Vargas doesn't want to lose the lucrative trade deal with Germany, so he manages to convince the German ambassador, Karl Ritter, that he was always friendly to German populations in Brazil. This actually ends up working, and Karl reports back to Germany to explain of incredible German-Brazilian relations. Spinning around on the other foot at the exact same time, Vargas positions himself for closer ties with the US. Speaking to the American ambassador, Jefferson Caffery, Vargas convinces him that he is staunchly anti-Nazi, and this works. Caffery reports back to the US, reporting that Brazil is a staunch American ally.
That's got to be the best part I've ever seen.
However, as World War II kicks into high gear with the surrender of France, the British blockade stops trade with Brazil's biggest trading partner. Vargas then begins to drop hints to the UK and the US that he may join the Axis. This leads them to then bribe Brazil to stay out of the Axis. On the 3rd of October 1939, Vargas, as well as several other South American leaders, sign the Panama Declaration. Yet on the 11th of June 1940, Brazil's Navy Day, Vargas would contradict this seemingly pro-American stance. Instead of condemning Mussolini for joining the war as Roosevelt had done, Vargas low-key supports Mussolini, saying in a speech, "It is necessary to comprehend the new epoch and remove the debris of old ideas and sterile ideals." While the speech receives wild praise from the Axis, Vargas has to calm American nerves, saying that it was only for domestic consumption. Vargas assures Roosevelt that it is not connected to current affairs in any way. In December 1941, after being surprised in Pearl Harbor, the USA joins the war. By January of 1942, America takes steps to reinforce their position in both North and South America, forging alliances with everyone but Argentina and Chile. Vargas senses that the tides are turning and pushes for an alliance with the US. He negotiates with the US to build airfields, which the Germans see as a violation of Brazilian neutrality. Being World War II Germany, they see the best course of action is to begin sinking Brazilian merchant ships. In fact, the infamous U-boat U-507 ended up sinking 5 in a single day. Whilst Brazil pushes out German agents, Argentina and Chile don't. This forces Brazil to push America to ensure that they support Brazil over Argentina. And on the 3rd of March, the US signed their second Lend-Lease with Brazil, supporting them fully over Argentina. When hearing this news, a very salty Hitler demands that the tax on Brazilian ships be doubled. Vargas had hoped to keep Brazil out of the war and use it more as a money-making machine. Yet, as German attacks on Brazilian ships mounted, public pressure followed suit, and Vargas was forced to bring Brazil into World War II. On the 22nd of August 1942, Brazil would formally declare war on Germany. When looking at Brazil in World War II, it's important to note the distinctly different campaigns it fought. Firstly was that fought on the ocean by the Marinha do Brasil, or the Brazilian Navy. The second was that fought on land, which we'll get to in a bit. This was the Força Expeditionary Brasileira. Força Expeditionary Brasileira. That. I'm sorry. Otherwise known as the Brazilian Expeditionary Force, or FEB, which are the names I will probably use for the rest of the video. Taking a brief look at the Brazilian Navy, its main mission was to protect ships between the Atlantic and Gibraltar. They would also go on to aid over 3,000 merchant ships and military transport ships across their dangerous passage. The Brazilian Navy would even take on the German Navy over 60 times. This obviously came with losses though, and it's estimated that the Brazilian Navy lost around 1,000 merchant marines and Navy sailors during these campaigns. However, accompanying the Brazilian Navy was their Air Force.
Where's the bloody Air Force?
Flying a total of 445 missions comprising of 2,550 sorties, they would only end up accounting for 5% of Allied missions flown in the European theatre. Yet the Brazilian Air Force would go on to destroy 28% of the bridges they targeted, 36% of the fuel depots, and 85% of the ammunition depots. I'm not gonna lie, that's impressive. Alright, okay, this is why you're here. The big main event. At the moment Brazil entered the war, it was obvious that their under-equipped and fairly small army was in no way ready to fight a world war. So Vargas turned to the USA for assistance in building up his army. The Americans weren't that keen in supplying the Brazilians, as they were trying to make sure that their own forces in both the Pacific and in Europe were fully supplied. However, the Americans quickly realised it would be insulting to turn down the Brazilians, so agreed to supply them with uniforms, rifles and some older artillery pieces. Now, kind of being supplied by the Americans, Brazil began training 3 regiments, each with service and support companies attached. This was the beginning of the FEB. The FEB was 25,000 men strong, which was a lot lower than the original envisioned 60,000, yet it was still full of men with strong fighting spirit, ready to get into the fray. The FEB would be forced to train with Springfield rifles instead of the more modern M1s, as the Brazilian army simply didn't have enough to hand. Yet they would train intensely, and despite all these setbacks, in July 1943 were ready to join the war. Yet, as the FEB prepared to move out, they hit another snag. The Americans had failed to supply them with any half-tracks, tanks or jeeps because American quartermasters hadn't prioritised them.
I keep having this nagging feeling that I've forgotten something.
The FEB were still eager to fight despite the lack of equipment, yet discussions moved on to where they would be deployed. Everywhere from guarding Portuguese islands to fighting in North Africa, the discussions would go on for over a year.
2,000 years later.
However, things began to change come 1944, as the Axis had been pushed back deep into Italian territory. The Allies had become bogged down with heavy fighting in northern France, and the situation in Italy wasn't much better, with the multinational push needing every single ounce of help it could get against an increasingly desperate and entrenched Axis resistance. Finally, however, the FEB got the call to come to war, and the first 5,000 set sail for Italy, where they had no weapons waiting for them and no accommodation. Still, even in the face of yet more setbacks, in June 1944, they would leave their base in Naples. They were headed for Tarquina in the province of Viterbo, Lazio. I apologise to any Italians.
Che schifo. Che schifo.
It was here they would receive not just another setback, but a massive blow to morale when the Americans handed them weapons and then decided to train them further, as their training under the Brazilian army was deemed inadequate. The Brazilians were still eager to fight, but understandably now frustrated that it had been so long before they was allowed into the fray. This gave rise to the phrase, "É mais fácil uma cobra fumar do que a feb ir para a guerra." I apologise for how badly I probably pronounced that. I gave it my bestest shot. However, in English, the phrase goes, "It is more likely for a snake to smoke a pipe than for the FEB to go into combat." It's kind of similar like to saying, "when pigs fly." The unit then adopted this phrase and had patches of snakes smoking a pipe sewn into their uniforms. Come September 1944, the FEB finally reached the third lines at the Arno River in Tuscany. Now, you may have noticed throughout this video the amount of training that the FEB had undergone, and this meant that a lot of the soldiers were still green, aka they hadn't seen battle yet. The only exceptions to this rule were a few officers who had fought in the Brazilian Revolution. The FEB had quite literally been thrown in at the deep end, and the lifeguard had gone on holiday. The FEB would fight skirmishes with German and Italian forces that for some reason were still loyal to Mussolini into the winter. At this point, the Allies suddenly realised that the Axis isn't actually doing that well in a war that's now three fronts. So they decide to make a push in spring 1945 in Bologna, called Operation Encore. To pull this off, however, they would need to take control of the mountains in Tuscany. The FEB were the lucky ones chosen for this task and found themselves fighting in the mountains against veteran German troops known as Jäger. Why am I Scottish? On top of this, most of the men fighting had never even seen snow before. I just hope someone was nice enough to let them know that they don't eat the yellow snow. The FEB would work closely with the Americans and push the Axis all the way up to Monte Castello. The FEB then found themselves fighting literal uphill battles against perfectly nestled German defences. One failed assault would see the Brazilians take 150 casualties compared to the German 17. This sort of thing seemed to reoccur, and a captured FEB soldier was told by a German captain, "Frankly, you Brazilians are either crazy or very brave. I never saw anyone advance against machine guns and well-defended positions with such disregard for life. You are devils." From the sounds of it, the captain made some yellow snow. The difficult terrain would be a constant challenge for the FEB, but they would engage the Germans at Monte Castello. Monte Castello was a German artillery position that was crucial for Operation Encore to succeed. To help with this, the FEB would often go on night patrols to gather intelligence or take prisoners. Early in the 1945 campaigning season, the British and American offensive that was part of Operation Encore wished to see the German 10th and 4th armies pushed out of Italy. The Brazilians supported the Americans on the left flank with an entire division, this time actually having armour to back them up. Part of the FEB's duties at this point was sending out patrols, clearing minefields and scouting nearby villages. This is important for the next story, which nearly every Brazilian person watching this probably knows. On the 14th of April 1945, a short while before the main attack, a Brazilian mountain patrol consisting of 3 men, Geraldo Alberto de Cruz, Arlindo Lucio da Silva, and Geraldo Rodrigues de Souza, would find themselves ambushed by the German army and heavily outnumbered. Now, the story I'm about to tell you is heavily mixed with legend, so not all of it may be 100% true. I am just repeating what I have heard, what I have read, and what I have watched. It is up to you to decide how true this story is. The story goes that they were unable to be reinforced. The 3 men decided to return fire until they ran out of ammunition as artillery shells fell around them. How scared were the Germans that they used artillery shells on 3 guys? Once they'd run out of ammunition, the 3 men made a decision. They fixed bayonets and charged at the German machine guns. They didn't win, but they did find their place in legend. Now here's where things get iffy. At least 1 grave was found with the inscription Drei Tapre Brasil, or Free Brave Brazil. This is dated the 24th of the 1st, 1945. Which raises an issue. However, the 3 soldiers in the grave are confirmed to be those 3 soldiers via their dog tags. The fact that the Germans bothered to bury them is in itself a strange fact. To add on top that it was actually so far before the attack, unlike the story, it just becomes a complete mystery. There is actually another version of the story where the gravestone instead read Drei Brazilian Marche Helden, or 3 Brazilian Heroes. Sadly, we can't confirm what actually happened on that day, or apparently even when that day was, but the impact it had on the people of Brazil was profound. If these men did die so close to the attack, they would sadly not be the only casualties the FEB would suffer during Operation Encore. A large chunk of these casualties would come from fighting in Monte Castello, which was so brutal it was fought house to house, street to street. Eventually Mussolini would be killed by Italian partisans on the 24th of April 1945. This led to the complete and unconditional surrender of all Axis forces in Italy. Also, no, I'm not putting a picture up. If you want to see that picture, it's on the internet. You can look that up of your own volition. I'm not getting my channel banned from YouTube. Much of the victory at Monte Castello is actually attributed to the Brazilian Artillery Division, who cannonaded the summit of Monte Castello and paved the way for the rest of the FEB. Anyways, at this point, for the FEB, the war was over, and they returned home. Apart from the fact that Vargas disbanded them, but we'll get to that in a sec. For the national consciousness of Brazil, the death of the 3 men became a perfect symbol of their struggle. Fighting in a war on another continent, in unfamiliar surroundings, the fight rapidly passed into legend. They didn't have to be there, but they were, and it's important to remember the role they played in the liberation of Europe. The FEB victories helped pave the way for the Allies in Bologna, although US-Brazilian relations would begin to strain because the Brazilians didn't stay for the final push on Germany. However, the FEB captured tens of thousands of Axis prisoners of war, and they became so popular that Vargas quite literally shat himself and decided to disband them before they even got home. And like all of his other plans, I'm joking, this worked awfully, and he was ousted from power 4 months later. By the way, the Sabaton song, based around the same events I've just discussed, is currently played by Brazilian marching bands. Now, the next 2 videos will stay with the World War theme, and I know I've done a lot, and please don't be mad at me. Tell you what, it's almost Christmas, so let's call a truce. See you in the next one.